Hey, how's it going? You doing all right? Yeah, nighttime can be kind of tricky sometimes. I remember I used to get really anxious whenever the sun would go down. It was like I swear my body could, even if I was inside, it was like my body knew when the sun was going down, and I would just get a little anxious about it. It can feel kind of lonely at times too at night, especially if you live alone or, everything just gets really slowed down and quiet. So it's just kind of you and your thoughts, which can be a little overwhelming sometimes. And it's always so tricky because it's like you don't want to think anxious thoughts. And but if you try to control them, it's almost like they get bigger and bigger and harder to control. It's hard to get out of your mind sometimes, especially at the end of a day when you've had a lot going on. Or I know sometimes I'll just distract myself with work a lot, and then, the day goes well, and then nighttime everything gets quiet and slows down, and everything's kind of right there waiting for me. Yeah, it's a lot. It's all right. I always start with just taking breaths as much as I can, just in my belly. I try to do little nightly rituals too that help me, like light a candle, or I like to have hot tea at night. My thing is, I like to have hot tea with local honey in it, and I really like mint tea because there's no caffeine in it, and I don't know, I feel like it's good for your stomach or something to just have mint tea at night. It just sort of calms me down. I also try to read before bed, or I'll watch like an ASMR video or something to just sort of wind down. But of course, it depends what I'm reading too, because sometimes I'll read something that's really stimulating, which just, you know, gets my mind working even more. It's hard to fall asleep when you've had a lot on your mind too, especially if there's like a lot going on in your life with relationships or family or work or health or money. It's like there's always something. Sometimes it's like, if I could only get these few aspects of my life in a set spot, in a balanced spot, then I'd be fine. But then once you get one, it's like there's always something else. I know I recently just paid off my car, which was really exciting for me. So I had no more car payments. And I swear, like 2 days later, the check engine light went off. And I was like, no. I was so excited that I wouldn't have any more car payments. And then now I've got to take it into the shop. It's like, man, why can't I just have smooth sailing for a while? Hmm. But hey, at least the day is over. And now you're here. And now you can relax. Well, relax as much as you can. If you're feeling really overwhelmed or your mind won't slow down, then it can be difficult. I like to read lots of books that sort of put me in a good mood at night. Or I'll listen to like a sleep story that puts me in a good mood. Isn't it funny that when we're little kids, it's understood that like giving a child a bedtime story before bed is like good for them and helps them fall asleep good, but it's kind of taboo for us as adults, you know. But it helped us fall asleep as kids, so we should keep doing it, I think. I used to use that Calm app. Um, I don't pay for it anymore, so I don't use it anymore, but they had like these nighttime stories on there. And there was one on there, I think it was Harry Styles or someone with a British accent, is all I remember. And it had, oh, maybe it was Matthew McConaughey actually. I don't remember, but it had a really good story that was really magical, and the voice was so like relaxing, and I loved listening to it because I would always have like magical dreams right before or that night when I went to sleep, because I listened to the sleep story before. And I always thought, oh my gosh, I want to have good dreams tonight, so I want to listen to this story because I love, like, there's nothing better to me than flying in a dream. Like, dreams where I'm flying, it's funny. That's like, I feel like that's like my barometer for my mental health sometimes, is if I'm having lots of dreams where I'm flying, then I'm in a pretty good headspace because they're the best dreams. And I always wake up feeling really excited and good about them. Actually, this is kind of crazy. I haven't told too many people this. I don't know if this happens to you or not, but when I was younger, I used to dream of the same worlds. Like, for years, I remember there were like 8 different worlds that I used to dream about. And I would just dream about them. And this was over, 20 years of my life. I would just have a dream about this world, and then I wouldn't think about it for like a year. And then I'd go back to sleep and I'd be back in that world, and the whole dream would take place in this world. And each world had its own really vivid, really unique set of rules and landscapes and people. And I remember one of the worlds was like this giant crater, like huge crater, like made out of like red rocks, like on Mars. And in the middle of this crater was a huge lake, like it was full of water, the crater. And everyone traveled around on like, they were kind of like jet skis, like boats, but more like different, almost like steampunkish. Um, yeah, and like kind of sailboaty. And there were like cliffs into the edge of the crater, like on the bowl part of the crater. There'd be like little cliffs, and people lived on the cliffs around the water. Um, Kind of like, like those old, like tribal mesa places where like indigenous cultures used to live, like in Colorado and stuff, the caves that were carved out of the red rocks. It was like that. Um, yeah, that was one of the worlds. And I always had like a bunch of them. Um, but I always knew if I was going to visit one of those worlds or dream about them, that it was like really exciting for me. I was always really happy to do that. I don't know what triggered that. Um, but yeah, do you ever have anything like that? Do you ever have like a place in your dreams that you constantly revisit? I also always revisit. I went to like a private school when I was younger, and I went there from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. So most of my life took place at this school, and I dream about it all the time. All the time I dream of being back there, just on the property, just the building itself and the land itself. I'm sure it means something, but I have no idea what it means. But it makes me feel good sometimes to have that It's nice to feel like you have a safe place in your dreams to go back and visit, you know? Yeah. Hmm. So tell me, how was your day? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. If you don't want to revisit it, it's okay. I understand if you just want to forget about it for a little bit. But if you do want to tell me, you can tell me. It can be a lot. There's just so much that we are expected to juggle, you know? Especially like in our modern society with all the work and money and family and relationships. It's okay to be stressed out. It's okay to need a break. I took an Epsom salt bath tonight, so I'm chilled out. I definitely have my little nightly ritual routines. Epsom salt baths help me a lot. I love Epsom salt baths. My hot cup of tea, reading a book, lighting a candle. I try to meditate. I mentioned this in one of the other videos, but I like using Insight Timer when I meditate. It's like free, but you can like set up your like custom bell and everything. So I have one that always puts me in a very relaxed mood that I like to listen to. Sometimes I feel like I get exactly what I need from it. Like I like channel this message from, I don't know, the higher self part of me or my guides or angels or whatever it is that you want to call it. But it always tells me exactly what I need to hear. And it's always from my heart, which helps a lot because when I'm anxious or overwhelmed or like really sensitive to things, it can be really easy for me to get caught up in my head. And it helps me drop back down into my heart. And that just seems to be where everything feels safe and good and everything's okay. I think we forget that sometimes, you know? We can get so busy that we forget like that the heart stuff is what really matters. I think if we all lived our lives from our hearts, we'd be living in a very different world. But journaling helps me out a lot too. So I like to write all that stuff down, especially poetry. You know, when I was really little, when I was like 12 years old, 11, 12, 13, that age, I struggled really, really, really bad with anxiety and depression. And there were a lot of factors that went into it. Well, for one, I went to an extremely strict private school, religious private school, and I just thought and felt differently than a lot of the people there, and never really felt safe there, which gave me a lot of anxiety and depression. And I struggled a lot with that. And I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't really feel like I had anyone to talk to. I was a very sensitive kid and still am sensitive, but didn't know how to navigate it when I was little. So I got bullied a lot and made fun of a lot and harassed all the time. And I just didn't know what to do with all those feelings because I was so angry. I was angry at the people who were, bullying me and harassing me. But I also didn't want to hurt anybody because I was a really empathetic kid and, like I said, really sensitive. So I kept all those emotions inside, which just made all my anxiety and depression way worse because my soul and my body were trying to express something, and I was too afraid to let it flow. I was too afraid to let it out because I didn't want to be like them, and I didn't want to be like the people who I felt like were hurting me. And so I started writing then. I just started journaling everything and writing poetry as a little kid just to get it out somehow. I just didn't know how else to express myself because it didn't really, when you're a kid like that, it felt like no one wanted to listen, like no one understood the weight of it. And that happens sometimes, like it's interesting when you're going through something like that, it feels so big in your mind and it's just so all-consuming and so overwhelming. And you think, how can no one else see the struggle that I'm dealing with? How can no one else see it? But because it seems so obvious to you, but people can't always see it. And so they don't always know what you're going through. They don't always know what you're dealing with. Or they just don't understand the weight of what you're dealing with. That was my case when I was little. I think some people knew what I was going through, but they didn't understand how big it was for me and how serious it was for me. Because it lasted for years. Your hormones are changing. You're trying to establish your identity. You're trying to make sense of who you are. And yeah, and I really, really struggled a lot when I was younger like that. A bunch of my friends moved away. They all went to different high schools and stuff. So I just felt really alone and didn't know what to do with it. And so I journaled a lot. And I was really angry. I was angry at all the bullies, and I was angry at all the people who were making fun of me because I was a little bit of a chubby kid. And I had a really high-pitched voice, and so I was an easy target. But I remember one of the things that helped me was the house that I grew up in. We had a lot of property, and there were all these trees in the backyard. And I would come home from school, and I had lots of time by myself there. And I would go into the backyard, and I would play around in the backyard by myself. And I had a very wild imagination at the time. And so I would pretend that the trees were my friends. And I would talk to them. And I would just tell them everything that I was going through that I couldn't tell my parents or that I couldn't tell anyone else because of the environment that I was in. And because I was so angry and I had all this frustration and I didn't know what to do with it, I started breaking sticks in my backyard because I felt like I had all this anger and frustration, and I just kind of somehow intuitively knew that I needed to get it out somehow, that I couldn't keep holding on to it anymore. I was going to explode. And so I used to go up to these trees and ask for their permission if I could break sticks against them. And in my wild imagination then, I had one tree in particular that I really liked, that I started gathering up all these big sticks that like they were the sizes of like broomsticks, and I would just pretend that I was a ninja. And I remember Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon had just come out, and I loved the movie so much. And I would just sword fight with these trees, and I would just hit him and hit him and hit him, and pretend like I was fighting them, and that I was fighting all of my anxieties, and I was fighting all of these thoughts that I was battling, and all of these emotions. I would just pretend like I would slay them, and I could fly around them, and I could attack them, and I could beat them. And I did this every day for a long time. I just got it all out. And when I wasn't doing that, I was writing poetry. And when I wasn't doing that, the other thing that I loved to do, and this was actually how I discovered meditation. This is kind of a funny story, and channeling for that matter. Um, well, formal channeling, I guess. I had an electric scooter at that age, which it's funny because now electric scooters are kind of cool. I used to get made fun of so much for riding a scooter. I loved razor scooters and I had an electric scooter. All my friends had like BMX bikes and they were skateboarders and all that stuff. So anytime I had my scooter, they would just make fun of me for it because if you were on the scooter, it was like, oh, you can't skate, you know? um, and so I would come home, and the neighborhood that I lived in, that I grew up in, was very, very pretty. There were these giant old grandfather oak trees, like huge overarching oak trees that went over all the streets and driveways, and the sun would just, glisten through the branches, and there was Spanish moss everywhere, and they were just green, and the air was so clean and fresh. It was beautiful. And so I would charge up my electric scooter, and I would because it was, pre iPod days, so I had my CD player or my Walkman, and it had to have like the no skip option, because if you were going to hit a bump or run with it, you didn't want the CD to skip. And I had like a fanny pack thing for it, so like you could wear your CD pack around your waist. It was like an like elastic fanny pack thing, and I would hop on my scooter, and I would put my headphones in, and I would ride up and down the streets of my neighborhood and just look up at the oak trees and the way the sun went through the oak trees. And I would listen to the song Breathe by Telepop Music. If you've never heard it, you should go listen to it. It might also be called Another Day, but I think it's called Breathe or Just Breathe by Telepop Music. And I discovered it from a Now CD. I think it was like Now 6. Now that's what I call Music 6. Maybe it was 6. I don't know. One of those earlier ones. That song was on there. And I would ride my scooter. I would listen to that song on repeat for hours and just look up at the trees and just sort of figure eight on my scooter, and it would just put me in this like meditative trance, and it made me feel like I was flying. It made me feel so good, and like all the anxiety and all those feelings were just sort of like drifting off of me as I rode the scooter. It just gave me so many positive memories and helped me process so many things. And it's super interesting because now that I'm so much more educated and have done so many different therapies and just, much more educated on everything from channeling to meditation to all that kind of stuff, I knew there was something about that song in particular. And I was like, for some reason, this song makes me feel different than other music. And I'm only, 11, 12 years old at the time. And now when I re-listen to it, it's so obvious why it was that particular song, and it's so obvious what it was doing for me at that time. That song is binaural when you listen to it. So the music's playing, it's alternating from both sides. And it's a trance-like song. It's an electronic song that's trance-like. So it puts you in a binaural frequency state when you listen to it. Of course, I didn't know this at the time, but now that I know psychology and stuff, I know what that is. But if you're doing like EMDR therapy or any kind of trauma therapy like that, they play binaural music in your ears. And what that does is it triggers parts of your brain that usually you can only access through sleep. So it helps you process certain emotions faster and more intensely. And I think about that all the time, of how cool it is that I was just a little boy. I had no idea any of the science behind it or anything like that. I just thought, I really like this song. It feels good to me. And I like riding my scooter around, and the trees are really pretty. And I am having all these emotions that I need to process. And so I was just writing poetry. I was beating up the trees in my backyard with sticks, and I was riding my scooter, pretending I was flying, listening to this binaural trance music, and just daydreaming. And it's so funny because that's basically what they do in therapy. If you go to therapy, you're gonna express a lot of emotions, probably through writing or through whatever you need to. And if you're doing EMDR therapy or brain spotting therapy or intense trauma therapy like that, you're going to listen to binaural frequencies on headphones with your therapist, and you're going to process things that way. Or you're going to butterfly tap, or bilateral stimulation tapping. But I think as kids, we already know what we need, and we know how to take care of ourselves. But sometimes we let our own judgments get in the way and our minds get in the way. But I really think all anyone ever needs is just empathy. Empathy with themselves, empathy with other people. They just need a safe place where no one's going to judge them and they feel safe. And then you know what you need. I feel like I can offer a bunch of tips and tools that help me and stories that help me, but at the end of the day, it's just, if we lived in a world where everything was safe and there was no judgments, I think we'd all just heal ourselves pretty quickly and rapidly from anything and everything. Because in a world where it's safe to just follow your heart knows what you need. I hope that helps in some way. I don't know. I know I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but sometimes it's helpful to me to just listen to somebody talk, just share their stories. Especially after a long day, it's just nice to have someone to talk to. I hope this helped a little bit. I hope you're feeling a little bit better. Maybe when you go to sleep tonight, maybe you'll have a dream about being on a scooter, listening to music, pretending like you're flying and looking up at the oak trees and the way the sun is shining through them. And this huge canopy of branches and going up and down this beautiful street of oak trees. It's a very magical place for me, at least in my imagination it is. So, I hope you have happy dreams tonight. I hope that you are feeling a lot more relaxed, and yeah, I hope that when you dream tonight, you have a flying dream, or you revisit one of your favorite worlds from a kid, from your childhood, that maybe it's been a while since you've visited. It's all there inside of you. You can't ever lose it. So maybe if we set the intention tonight, we'll both dream of those. We'll both get to revisit our old childhood fantasy worlds that we haven't been to in a long time. That sounds fun. Thanks for spending time with me. Thanks for hanging out. I hope you get really good rest tonight, and I hope you wake up feeling good. All right. I'll see you next time.